I started my career in workforce development with the state of Kentucky in 2010. That experience ignited a deep passion for manufacturing within me. I started this show hoping to raise more awareness around the bright outlook manufacturing careers have. Join me as I sit down with some of the manufacturing industry's most successful changemakers and learn how they're partnering people with technology. It's time to give people more meaningful work. This is Workforce 4.0.
All right. Hey, hi, how are you guys out there? And we are live. And today is a very special day because this is our season finale of Workforce 4.0. And I couldn't think of a better guest to have on than Ben Armstrong. Ben is an MIT researcher, and he works a lot on studying SMEs, which is a huge part of my client base as well. And I'm just really excited to get into what your takeaways are from your research and what you feel like the future of Workforce 4.0 will be, and kind of what you're seeing now. So welcome, Ben.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I start every show, I'm a huge music lover. So I start every show with kind of your favorite song, or I do karaoke events sometimes. But can you share with us kind of what your favorite song is, or one of your favorites?
Yeah, while working on these issues, I typically listen to music, and it's not karaoke music because there are no words. But I really like Max Richter and his Infra series, which is all kind of a modern take on more classical music. So yeah, I'll give it to one of Max Richter's Infra songs.
I love that. I'm gonna write that down because I really enjoy when I'm working. I like kind of the same, like instrumentals and things like that. Have you ever heard of the band Piano Guys?
No, I haven't.
They're really cool. They take like pop hits, and then they mix it with classical hits. So like they'll take a Beethoven song and they'll mix it with like I don't know, just a rock band or something that you would be familiar with, but they don't have any lyrics, and it's perfect for like deep work and deep thinking. So I think you'd like them.
Great.
Awesome. Well, perfect. Well, I want to remind anybody that's watching today, if you guys have any questions for Ben or want to contribute to the conversation in any way, please just drop your comments. I'll be going over those as we go over the conversation as well. And without further ado, let's get started into the conversation. Does that sound good with you?
Sure.
Perfect. Okay, so I have read your Forbes article, and I read that back when it was published back in 2021. I thought it was some really great content because you really get in depth with what's kind of missing in the workforce from what you're seeing through your research. And outside of that, you've also been published several times for your research work at MIT. And, when you think about regarding like robots and automation, I think that some of the findings may be similar to what I see as well, but I'd love to get your takes on it. But the prime focus of your research is usually SMEs, right?
Yeah, I think there's a large gap in terms of technology adoption, wages, and even workforce challenges between large and small firms. So 98% of all manufacturers have fewer than 500 people. And that's the big chunk that I focus on. Of course, when you focus on smaller and medium firms, it's necessary also to think about the larger manufacturers that might buy their products, because these small, medium firms typically, their bread and butter are at the lower tiers of the supply chain. And then the larger OEMs clearly can have influence, or in some cases even dictate the types of business practices that their suppliers adopt. So it's not like SMEs exist in a vacuum. Certainly they respond to cues and trends at larger firms, but I do think they face a particular set of challenges. One difference is that a lot of these firms are privately and even family owned. They're multi-generational businesses that have existed for a longer time and have a tougher time accessing capital to really transform, to think about technology or to think about their production processes in a greenfield way. Oftentimes they're in buildings or working with processes that are generations old. So that's an inherent challenge. There's something, I think, beautiful about that. There's something romantic about it. The American factory that dates back to the World Wars. There's something that's really, I think, appealing about supporting these SMEs, but they also have a challenge because they're dealing with legacy equipment. They're dealing with people who've been doing similar types of work for decades and decades. So thinking about change or technology upgrading in that context is very different than a firm that might be setting up a new greenfield factory every few years, or a startup. And there are more and more manufacturing startups over the last 5 years that is starting fresh with mostly new equipment, and it's able to recruit workers to a more exciting production environment. So those legacy SMEs, I think, face a different set of challenges, and they also they don't adopt technology as quickly. And that's borne out by the data. So while capital expenditures have increased among the largest firms, they've been flat at SMEs, these capital expenditures per worker. And overall productivity at SMEs, this is measured as value added per worker, has lagged far behind productivity at larger firms. And same with wages. So SMEs oftentimes have a tough time competing with their larger peers for production workers, because the large firms just can pay more, which is, of course, linked to their investment in technology and their productivity. So this is one reason why I focus on SMEs, because they're a critical piece of U.S. manufacturing. The success of the large firm depends on their capabilities, and yet they face a lot of an uphill road, let's say.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because there's as you just described, there's a lot of challenges that SMEs face in competing with the larger manufacturing companies. And given some of those challenges, what do you think that how do you think the technology alone will say? What do you think that will play a role in the overall success rate of the survival of SMEs?
Did you say the technology alone?
Yeah, just the technology that's coming out with, when you think of like Industry 4.0 technology and stuff, like how do you think, first of all, if there is a gap that exists there between SMEs and Industry 4.0 technology, how does that gap, how is that going to play into their ability to really compete in the future in retaining and attracting, recruiting employees?
Yeah, this is one area where I think I depart, or I think about it a bit differently than a lot of other folks in the field, where there have been a lot of assumptions about Industry 4.0 technology, which, of course, I think the term and a lot of the technologies come out of Germany, and these ideas of a connected factory are very powerful and lead to a lot of, kind of spark the imagination. Whoa, what if we could get all of our equipment to connect to our ERP, to connect to our other software systems, and then we could be much more efficient, and our workers could even be measured on performance. So there's a lot of I think that the initial thinking and the thinking that I've read about Industry 4.0 has assumed that because this technology exists and these capabilities exist in theory, that it will inevitably have an impact on how firms do business and how workers, what job opportunities workers have and what tasks they take on. In practice, I think it's much different. I don't know of many firms at all that have achieved the theoretical limits of Industry 4.0 or even gotten close. So the idea of a connected factory is a fantasy for most firms. And even the firms that have achieved it, they might have one or two connected factories, but their other factories are much more prosaic. So I think that focusing on the technology frontier and the skills and the tasks that might exist in a totally connected factory is pretty far different from what the practical workforce challenges are at many factories across the country, large and small. So just to give you an example, fewer than 10% of factories in the United States have any robots at all, and that number. The number of new robot installations has been pretty flat over time. I'm mentioning robots because they're kind of a common and pretty tangible piece of equipment,
Sure.
also because you have them in your logo. But yeah, so even robots, which we think of as even 10 years ago being what it meant to be an advanced manufacturer, in part meant having robotics, it's still a really small minority of firms that have adopted any robots at all. And about half of the firms that have adopted robots just have one. It's not like their whole factory is connected. It's like the robot might be just an island on the factory floor, even if it's used at all. So I think the discussions of the technological possibilities of robotics, Industry 4.0, more automated processes, has really distracted from some of the adoption challenges for many companies. And what does it mean if a company hasn't adopted this technology? It means that the skills they require among their workers are much more basic, are more similar to the skills of 10, 20 years ago. So when my colleagues and I would go talk to manufacturers and we ask them what positions are open, what skills are you looking for to fill them, we also ask them about how they think about new equipment purchases and new technologies. They don't typically identify very specific skills that they need. They talk about hire for will, train for skill. They want to hire people who will show up on time, who have a good attitude, who they think can thrive in their work environment. And then they invest years in training these individuals to fit their specific needs and their specific constellation of technologies on the factory floor. So when I look at, I can understand why SMEs in particular make that decision of hire for will, train for skill. But I also think it would be much more efficient if they were able to hire from a pool of workers that had some of those capabilities that they would be trying to train for in the first 1 to 3 years. So it didn't have to take so long to get a worker who is fully capable on the factory floor. Why is this important now? It's because turnover is higher for manufacturers. A lot of SMEs in the past had relied on people to be there their whole career or much of their career for more than a decade. But now if you have high turnover, the idea of investing 1 to 3 years in every worker just isn't plausible if you can't guarantee that they're going to be there for very long.
That's a huge that's a huge thing that I hear as well from my clients that I'm working with, which again are predominantly SMEs, that it's hard for them to make that justification of training if they're going to leave, if the turnover is so high. And that's some amazing information that you just gave us. And it's so thank you for that. That's great share. I do want to jump into the comments really quickly because we already have some comments and some questions. Our first one is coming from Aaron Prather. And Aaron says, SMEs are the backbone of U.S. manufacturing. Thank you to Ben for focusing on them and highlighting their struggles and opportunities. Yes. Thank you so much, Aaron. I agree, because I think we do get so caught up in those larger firms, right? Kind of like how you were saying. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I do think so. I think of one of the focuses, the motivations in my research is how the United States can improve its manufacturing capabilities. Of course, I think some of the same lessons for the United States can apply to other countries in Western Europe. I think Asian countries are facing a different set of challenges, but also have a different set of capabilities and resources, given that the big boom in, let's say, Japanese, Chinese, South Korean, and Singaporean manufacturing has come much more recently than the kind of original capabilities in, let's say, Germany, France, the US, and England. But in the US, I think there are 4 categories of key actors. And one are these legacy SMEs, family-owned businesses that are key suppliers in the auto industry, aerospace, metals. In the defense industrial base, these SMEs are really key. Some of our research shows that it depends on the region, but upwards of 40% of all SMEs have at least one defense contract. So the federal government plays a huge role in providing support for SMEs to kind of maybe smooth out some of the market volatility that SMEs might face with a defense contract that might be higher margin, allow them to buy new equipment or hire more people. But also is a source of vulnerability, because the types of investments SMEs need to make for DoD aren't necessarily the types of investments that always help them succeed in the market. Right, there are lots of front office administrative costs to comply with DoD contracts, and it's not necessarily the same lean model that you might need to compete for a GM contract, for example. So there's this really interesting category of these legacy family-owned SMEs that are a huge chunk of American manufacturers. The second category is startups. So startups, I think, have a really these are startups that are actually doing production work, not startups that are designing something that's going to be produced in Asia, or in Mexico, as the case may be. It's not to focus on Asia. Just I single out various Asian countries because they're highly productive and very have high technology operations. But I'm talking about startups that are actually producing parts, fixtures, assemblies, even full products in the United States. And these companies are interesting because I think they show us what the capabilities of these brand new technologies are, because they're not mixing legacy technologies with new technologies. They're starting these operations from scratch, oftentimes very engineering intensive operations. So it's exciting that these startups can show us what the frontier is of productivity. And I think, what wages production workers might be able to make in a highly productive operation. And then the other two categories are large firms that I think are becoming more vertically integrated, or there's signs they're becoming more vertically integrated after COVID because they want to control more pieces of the operation. I think this brings more opportunities for U.S. manufacturing. And then finally, there's the capitalists, the private equity firms, the investors, the large holding companies that are rolling up manufacturers to try to find efficiencies. And these actors, I think, have the benefits of scale, that if they have good ideas and good practices, they can scale up really quickly. And they also might be a resource, so they could be a hindrance to the transformation of these legacy SMEs. So those are the four key actors, and they have, I think, different practices that in my work, I try to look at what are they doing really well that we can learn from, and that policymakers or other business practitioners can emphasize and scale.
Absolutely. And for some of our audience that is joining us, if the startups, and I have personally enjoyed recruiting for startups. I've recruited for about 10 or so startups, and just been very fortunate to do so, because you're right, it is just such an exciting, different, invigorating experience. But those are kind of like your greenfield sites, right? That are just, you take a industrial site and you just build the manufacturing operations. And I couldn't agree more with that, because it is just really exciting for the community. Everybody gets, there's just generates a buzz of energy. So that's awesome. From those four actors that you were mentioning, in that are indicative to the United States, how do you feel like that compares to other countries where you've done research, such as Japan and other parts of the world, China?
Yes, so I'm not a specialist in those other countries and contexts, but I do think that one of the big differences in these other places is the ecosystem of supportive institutions for companies of all sizes. So in Germany, our research center at MIT has a partnership with the Fraunhofer Institutes in Germany, which are really technology and technology support organizations for companies that are interested in accessing or developing new technologies, mostly in manufacturing, but also in other areas. Now, the Manufacturing USA Institutes, which started as the Manufacturing Innovation Institutes in the US, were in part modeled on Fraunhofer, but they've been much more, I think, narrowly focused, and they haven't had the level of SME buy-in that Fraunhofer does. So it's really, we're kind of behind in scale, and Fraunhofer has been a huge part of the ecosystem. The other part of the ecosystem that's relevant to this conversation, and this is the German ecosystem in particular, is the vocational training system, which is not just community colleges plus. For our reference point, it's a system where there's strong worker organizations that are at the table with industry associations to set the curriculum. So every couple of years, the industry leaders will sit down with worker organizations to say, here are the tasks, here are how the tasks are changing in these different occupations. Here are the new things that we need people to learn. And it's setting a more common curriculum so that if you're an SME, you know that you're going to be able to find in the labor market workers who can accomplish certain tasks that you find important for your firm. So there's a lot of coordination that goes into that, goes in before the actual training is performed in the German context, which I think is really important. I don't think that type of system it really translates to the US, because we don't have strong industry associations relatively, and we don't have strong worker associations, nor do we have any coordination between them. But there is, I think, a goal of trying to develop a stronger sense of what the demand is for tasks and skills, would translate hopefully into community colleges that are more connected to where the market is.
Yeah, and that's a big reason of why I started this show because of my previous work in workforce development. It's everything was very siloed, and to really understand and develop training curriculum for the future of work, it was just so important to have that buy-in and that investment from our private sector employer base. And one of my goals for the show is to kind of recreate that same atmosphere of those conversations that we had at the Career Center for a broader audience, and maybe we can all kind of learn from each other. I do want to bring up some more of these questions. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for hopping in the chat. Mike Unger from our Industry 4.0 Club. He says, Ben, have you seen SMEs who have leveraged the connectivity that workers have through their personal cell phones? If yes, what results can you share?
So I don't have any systematic results of kind of no study we've done of how cell phone use at work or on the factory floor might help workers troubleshoot, for example. But I think you can imagine that when an employee, the typical process, right? If there's a machinist and they run into a problem with the machine, they might get a supervisor or a maintenance technician to try to fix or troubleshoot the problem. It's not always that they can solve the problem on their own. Similarly, if there's a new piece of equipment that a manager is interested in and they want to train up someone who previously did machining work or assembly work, whatever it is, on this new piece of equipment, they might bring in the company that makes the equipment and have them do a training or do some online modules. There's been a little bit of a shift, I think, in this where there's a DIY attitude in among some workers, which is I'm just going to look it up on YouTube. I'm going to figure out how to solve this problem by myself or learn this new technique by myself by watching YouTube videos. And we've taken this to heart that as academics, we write papers and we do case studies that are sometimes dense and not read by a wide audience. So we're as our group, which is the MIT Industrial Performance Center, is trying to produce short documentaries on YouTube to highlight cases of automation success and highlight cases of technology at work that we see as really instructive for other SMEs that might be struggling to adopt new technologies for automation. So this is kind of, we see people using YouTube as a real asset, real resource, and we want to kind of meet a lot of the folks we work with where they're at. Another interesting tactic. So there's this great group in Ohio that has an apprenticeship program that's certified through the local community college, but it's taught by a local CEO of a local manufacturer. And that instructor is really connected to the skills that he needs as an entrepreneur, as a leader of a manufacturing business. He has his students not only learn the traditional machining skills and traditional skills of what it takes to understand production processes. He also has them follow on Twitter and on LinkedIn, on the social media outlets, all the new tool manufacturers that are relevant to their business, so that they know the newest videos they're putting out, the latest machines that are being produced. So it's not like they just see at a trade show every year what the new equipment is. They're getting it straight from the equipment manufacturer, and they're trying to understand where the trends are going. So I like that in bringing essentially a passion for or a hobby for new manufacturing equipment to try to bring that into the classroom. So I really appreciated that tactic as well, which sort of speaks to Mike's question.
Absolutely. I enjoy really progressive educational providers and what they're doing. Do you have the name of that company? Maybe we could follow them on Twitter as well and follow along on their journey.
Oh, I'm sorry, Anne. You're breaking up a little bit. Can you repeat that one more time?
Sure. Yeah. Do you have the company name? I'd love to follow them on Twitter. I bet our audience would love to as well, so we can keep up with their journey too.
Oh, let me check in if I could give them a name and a Twitter handle. Yeah, I'd be happy to follow up with that.
Sure, absolutely. We have another question popping up here. I'm pretty sure this is also a co-founder of the Industry 4.0 Club, Carol Mitchell, and just we'll say LinkedIn user. I understand I'm always the random LinkedIn user when I pop into these chats as well. But our friend Carol is asking, how can leadership at SMEs who want to keep up to date access the tools they need to stay competitive? What are they asking for? That's an excellent question.
Yeah, I think it really varies widely, and that's one of the challenges that I've found is that there's kind of this snowflake challenge with SMEs that each of these companies has very specific skill needs. They have the way that they do business, and there's not a standard or a protocol that if you just provide these resources, they're relevant to a broad cross section of SMEs. I wish that were the case because then it would be easier if we learn something for it to scale across different companies. Um, I find that a lot of SMEs are going to their MEPs, their manufacturing extension partnerships, and I think MEPs have um, in some states they're much more resourced and able to answer the questions that SMEs need and provide resources. And others, they're really I think they're more strapped. So let me think about the what are they asking for? I think the main thing, if we just look at surveys, what SMEs are asking for is how do we hire and retain good talent, which is why I think, Anne, what you're doing is really important to think through the ways that SMEs can deal with their workforce challenges. And then the second piece that I think SMEs are asking for is how do we win new customers or compete for new business? Now, I'm not sure that that second question is more toward a subset of SMEs that are really growth oriented. And what I've been surprised with, I started my career in the software industry, which is just all focused on growth metrics. It's how fast can we grow? How many new users can we acquire? When are we going to double our revenue? And in manufacturing, the mindset is so starkly different that a lot of manufacturers with backlog, for example, or with long customer relationships, are really looking at how do we continue to build these customer relationships, manage our backlog. It's not a focus on growth unless that growth is going to come from existing customers. But the growth-oriented SMEs, I think, are looking at how do we get a competitive edge to win new customers, to outbid our competitors, et cetera. And I think that growth mindset is something that the current resources out there, the current ecosystem in a lot of regions doesn't really support. And I think the part of the frustration that sometimes here is that SMEs are always just trying to be sold something. If a technology vendor is coming out, they're trying to sell the technology. They're not trying to help them figure out where their next competitive edge comes from. So that's part of the challenge of this kind of fractured ecosystem in manufacturing, where if there is a manufacturer who really needs to hire or is struggling to grow, there's not a clear pathway of people they can ask for advice. So during COVID, for example, when there were a lot of these open questions about how do we survive, how do we build this, we need new capabilities, how do we get a new supplier for this thing that's out of stock, there was these kind of informal networks of manufacturers within region. I think they talked a lot more. My colleague has had specific conversations about how these networks that were very informal and kind of weak connections before COVID became stronger during COVID when these challenges became more urgent. So I think those informal networks are one way that manufacturers currently get new information and try to find out opportunities to grow. But I think the question that your colleague brings up is a real challenge that is currently unmet, I think, in most regions. There are some places that have a dense network of supportive organizations like MEPs and related ones, but not all areas in the U.S., to be sure.
Absolutely, yeah. I can only attest from my previous experience as well, but I think there's some very valid points there. Thank you for sharing that, Ben. I think we have time for one more question, if that's okay for the day. But just regarding, I don't know, I name all of my episodes very specifically, either things that I've said on LinkedIn or things that people have approached me and asked me about because, I know there's certainly some interest on those things, but I'm wondering, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that you probably get asked a lot as well, but kind of what the secret is, what's the secret sauce, right? Because a big struggle with the SMEs, again, is the recruiting and retaining talent long-term. And, what can we do better? How do we do better? What's that thing, right? And from your perspective, is there one thing that SMEs are doing that's standing out to you that's being successful, or is there a multitude of things that they're doing? And if it is a multitude of things, what are those things?
Sure. So I'll focus on three things. So one is technology related. The second is more workforce related, and the third is, I would say, management related. And it's different to think about these things at the firm level. So how do I succeed in my firm versus to think about it as at the ecosystem level, or how do we build a stronger U.S. manufacturing ecosystem? So at the firm level, what I've seen associated with success, and this is more anecdotal, is that firms that adopt technology to improve their flexibility. So typically with automation technologies, you think of, okay, what are the routine tasks that my workers are doing? What are they doing at 1,000 times a week, that I can then find a machine to do it at a lower cost and with more reliability? Now, that's a model of thinking of robots or of machines as more efficient workers who don't need to take bathroom breaks. I'm sure in your conversations with employers, you hear, oh, a robot is so good. It doesn't need to take a break and it never shows up late and all these things. But that mindset about adopting robotics and adopting new technology has a very, I think, limited ability to scale its impact. So if you take a worker off a machine and you just replace them with a robot, there's no upside for innovation, right? Your process doesn't really improve at all by just having the robot do repetitive tasks. And your flexibility when you need to switch from one type of unit to another doesn't improve either, right? Actually, in some cases, the switching time can go way up in an automated system versus relying on a human to switch between processes or switch between units. So oftentimes we see a trade-off when you adopt automation. There's a trade-off of you gain productivity, but you lose flexibility, and you might also lose innovation. So the firms that I think are really powerful are firms that adopt new technology, but also are train their workers enough to use it in a flexible way. So this technology can be deployed in different contexts. You can think about it in using the technology to start new processes altogether or to re-engineer old processes. So this is more of a positive sum automation where you're not trading off flexibility for productivity, but you're gaining some productivity, and you're also hopefully gaining flexibility as well. Maybe not as much productivity as you would gain in a kind of a pure routinized task, but you're trying to use new technology for more flexibility. So that's kind of how I think firms can use technology in a productive way, not just thinking about technologies competing with human workers. The second piece is I think firms benefit when they really trust their workers to use their creative skills and their experience on the job, rather than essentially just training the workers to, call the engineer. So some firms, and I think more engineering intensive firms, actually benefit from this, where they give workers a lot of autonomy and a lot of room for upward mobility. That if you learn to be creative and you learn to be autonomous on the job, you're rewarded both in compensation, but also in responsibility. So this is a pattern of when you adopt a piece of technology, you could use that technology to essentially disempower your workers, to turn your worker into just from a machinist to just an inspector, or you could turn them into a cell leader. And that turning point, I think, is really important. And empowering workers, I think, has a lot of downstream benefits. And then finally, the management question. I think that SME managers, by and large, are extremely smart, they're very strong-willed, and I'm generalizing here, but they're extremely capable people who have done to keep their business alive during the last 30 years of American manufacturing decline is a remarkable achievement. But I do think that many of them are risk averse, in that they, because they have been in survival mode for so long, they're unwilling to take risks. So they might just not have the capital to take risks that they would otherwise take. So I do think that the firms that are willing to take more risk and try out building new products, for example, you saw some of these firms emerge during COVID, that those are firms that really have the opportunity for growth. Obviously, there's this risk, growth opportunities come with risk, but the more risk tolerant firms, I find more exciting track it, and more innovative overall. And I think we'll fare better in the long term. I don't think firms should be on their own to take risks, given that where the market is for U.S. manufacturing and how far behind we are countries that subsidize manufacturing in various ways. I think that there's a role for public policy to make it easier for manufacturers to take risks, essentially de-risk some of the investments that manufacturers should be making. So long-winded answer for those three keys, I think, to hopefully that I see associated with success in manufacturing.
But such valuable takeaways there, right? I mean, that's just some great information to unpack, and I wish that we had hours to go over and unpack that. I would personally love to pick your brain. So, if you're up for it, we'll have to continue this discussion on another episode of Workforce 4.0. Absolutely. We are close to time today. If anybody out there in our audience wants to connect with you or reach out to you to learn more about your amazing work at MIT and what you guys are doing for the future of the workforce, how can they get in touch with you?
Sure, just send me an email, armst@mit.edu, and I'd be happy to chat.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate everybody for coming today to the comments and asking such amazing questions for Ben. Ben, I appreciate you for taking your time and speaking with me today about these influential topics. I think they're so important for people, and you were certainly a wealth of information for all of us, I think. So thank you for that.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. With that, I believe we're ready to close today. Ben, any final questions or remarks?
No, that's it. The rooster just crowed behind me, so I think that's a good conclusion.
I love that. Yes. I'm jealous. I could have some chickens, but that's neither here nor there. I appreciate you, Ben, so much. Thank you guys so much again. What a way to cap off season 1 of Workforce 4.0. We will see you guys in 2 weeks on September 7th for our next live episode. Thank you guys so much. You guys have an amazing day, and happy Workforce Wednesday.